My name is Jennifer Jones. I am the director for the Salem County Chamber of Commerce. I've lived in Salem my entire life. He was somebody I was very proud of. He worked for Anchor Glass, and it had several different names in the time he was there. It started out as the Salem Glass Factory, then it became Anchor Hocking, then it was Anchor Glass. He retired from there at 55 in 1983. He was the head mold maker at Anchor, and even after his retirement, he would do a lot of their specialty molds for them. He also did molds for Clevenger Brothers and Wheaton Glass. Because of the hazards that happened in the factory, they were funny about letting people in. So my dad would take me when I was getting ready to get married. Every payday, we would go to the company store, and I would buy something for my hope chest, which was kind of cool. And it was all kinds of Anchor products. So they pretty much just made containers in the Salem plant. But like I bought a punch bowl and a pitcher and things like that, glass, dishware and things that Anchor had made that they had available at the store. Several years, I think it was in 2014, the company had a large open house, and we were all invited. The community was invited. There were a lot of retirees that came. It was wonderful. We got to see the inside of the plant, the glass being made, which was really cool. We did not get to see the mold shop. But when I was a kid, we only had one car. So my dad would ride to work with several of his guys that he worked with, and if he needed something, like if he forgot his lunch or something, Mom would come in and we would park next to the mold shop, and there was a little window that you had to knock on and you could open it, and we would hand him whatever it was that he needed, like if he needed a tool or something he had forgotten. But I never got to see inside the mold shop. And even after they had closed, there was still a plant manager working there, and I kind of used my connections with the chamber, and I said, could I take a tour of the mold shop? And he said, there's really nothing left now. So I never got to see in there, but it was really heartbreaking. I will have to say that, anytime, because I'm the director of the Chamber of Commerce, anytime a business flounders or closes, it's hard. But it was extremely hard when Anchor closed because of our family connection. My grandfather worked at Capstan Glass in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. And when he was the assistant plant manager there. So when Capstan closed, he did 2 years worth of like floater work where he and a group of guys would go where they were needed in other glass factories. When Anchor bought the Salem Glass Factory, they called all of these guys who had been temporary workers in. So my grandfather, that's the reason that our family's even in Salem, is because of Anchor. And 40 families came from Connellsville, Pennsylvania once Anchor bought to work there. So the lady that lives across the street, she and her husband both worked there. And, Salem at the time, it was a walking town. So most people lived in Salem City and they just walked to work. So they all knew each other. There was the folks that had come from Connellsville stayed close while they were here. And, since a lot of them have retired and moved away. But that was a neat representation. And when the families moved here, a lot of them, there weren't enough houses for them because they hadn't built these other neighborhoods. It was just the original Salem town. And my grandfather lived in a rooming house for almost 2 years before he could bring the family, before he could find a place for them to live, because it was my grandparents and 3 children. I think what happened, because when my grandfather came from Capstan, he wasn't interested in working in management. It was really, really tough for him because he was one of the ones that had to stay as the plant was closing and they laid everyone off. So what happened is when he came here, he was not interested in taking a management role. So he worked in the inspections department. which was good because didn't have to work in the hot end. And I'm honestly not really sure how my dad ended up in the mold shop. I think it just might have been that was the job he got in when he was in high school, because it was like a work-study co-op thing. And I think he just enjoyed it because he was incredibly creative. And I think when he started doing he started out just repairing molds and doing, Anchor at the time, the Heinz plant, the ketchup plant was next door. So they would make all the ketchup bottles at the Salem plant and just kind of wheel them across on a big dolly with, piles of pallets. And what they would do is when a mold got, after they use it so many times, it kind of has to be recarved. So he would recarve, and I think that's how he got started in it. But it turned out he was really good, and he ended up being like their guy. And it's funny because when I see a bottle now, I can tell if it was his work because it's much finer quality. But when the Anchor plant closed, it closed in 2014. And it was heartbreaking because, again, there were almost 400 people that were working there at the time. Several folks I went to high school with that had worked there since the 80s. They did the same thing my dad did when we were in high school. They worked at Anchor after school. And it was really sad, between myself, Salem City Council folks, the mayor, and the Board of Commissioners for the county. We all did everything that we could. We got the NJEDA involved. We got the Business Action Center for the state involved. We tried to encourage them to come up with incentives that would keep Anchor here. And I think the ARTA Group, which is the company that bought Anchor, they had actually purchased the old Heinz plant, tore down the building, which was still, as of 2010, was still there, but they bought that site. They flattened the plant. There was talk that they were going to build another second plant and that they had gotten a contract for some kind of white glass, which is normally liquor. But, and then all of a sudden, they lost the Snapple contract. They lost the Arizona iced tea contract, which I have not drank since. When I'm like, okay, you did this to our town, you did this to, our community, not buying your products anymore. But when those two, that was still their biggest glass. When they lost those two contracts, that was just the end. Fortunately for the younger folks that were still working there, they were able to catch on with other anchors. And they were, their time that they served at ARTA counted, so they didn't lose anything towards their retirement. But none of them are here. They're in Jacksonville, Florida, and southern Georgia. So we lost 400 members of our community when the plant closed. So, neat little story. When I was a kid, my dad was really into glass. There's tons of examples around the whole property, but he was really into glass. So when I was little, we would go out and bottle hunt. And we would go to old, like where a house had fallen down. Back when I was a kid, people weren't as into restoring homes and things. So a lot of those houses, they would just move out and go someplace else. So those were the spots where we would go. And he taught me how to tell the difference between a new bottle and something that's a collectible. And we did a lot of bottle hunting on the weekends. And it was fun. It was fun. I found some neat things. I have a little, I think my dad said it was from Anchor, probably not this plant, but it was a little pig that was a little piggy bank. And it was glass, and it just had a little slot, and there was no plug in the bottom. And my dad said that probably it was from a bank that they would give them out, and that they would just break the pig. And I refused to do that. So I would fill it up, and then I would take a knife and try to get the change out so that I didn't break the little pig. Well, any place we would go on vacation, he always looked for unique glass pieces. like the fiddle bottles that they made. And when I was a kid, he ordered the presidential bottles they were like little mini bottles, and every month a new bottle would come, and we would get really excited and open it. And it was, at one point, it was a tight-knit community with all the folks that worked at Anchor. Really fun. They used to do a Christmas party every year for the kids, and all of us that were children of the Glass family, we would get invited and get a little gift and an orange and a candy cane. Anchor, I think, was a good company to work for. It fed a lot of families here and sent a lot of children to college. So the tools that he used, he made himself. It was an iron mold, so I wish I knew exactly what the chisels were made out of. But the chisels he made himself, and then the hammers were special. And he had different hammers that he would use. There was a lettering hammer. There was another, like a more fine detail that he used. And what was really cool is he was able to parlay the trade into his craft business, where he made brass and German silver belt buckles and door plates, and slate carved all kinds of different signs. The slate, I think, was the most challenging because it's kind of brittle. So there were times when he would have a really intricate design and he would hit it, and he would just have to do the whole thing over again. But I think he liked the challenge of the slate better because he had to be super, super careful. He also did some jewelry. I'm wearing a piece now. And he did buttons that were, the jewelry and the buttons and thimbles were made out of pewter. And he did the molds for them and poured them himself. So, in that workshop that isn't very big, he made all that happen there. But I think my favorite were the thimbles, because he made all different sizes, because he was cognizant that women's fingers are different sizes. So there's some that are really, really tiny. There are some child's thimbles that he made. A lot of the craft shows that he did were colonial based. So he wanted to have some things that people would have actually used back then. And people that bought from him, some of them bought for souvenirs, but I still use my thimble when I sew, when I hand sew. We were very happy to donate a number of things from his work. There were some bottles. We've donated some of the jewelry, and there's a large collection of the thimbles. Heritage was able to display his work for folks that will really, really enjoy it. And I think that means a lot to me. And I think it's probably making my dad pretty happy too, because glass was his thing.